Alright, Travis Wingutso. Part 5. This should be the end. We're in the final chapter, final stuff, but there's a lot to cover. So remember, this is part 5. I've been giving you a lot of prerequisite information. I don't want to have to repeat it because we're not going to have enough time to cover the information for this video if I do that. So if you're coming to this video first because YouTube recommended this video, or this was the video that was shown to you by YouTube first, understand there's other parts in this series. Thing I need to repeat though, because without fail, Mormons who come to this video automatically hear something that they've never heard of before and they don't like, they don't feel good about, and they run and hide and avoid listening to the information in this video. I will give you a warning right now. You will need to hear the information in my video. This is not me blowing my own horn, even though I am smarter than you on this particular field. It contains information of an educational and crucial, as we are in the prophecies that we are going over. It is now. So understand that, and understand I am Mormon, technically. My name hasn't been removed from the records of the church. I just don't go to church because of the inverted pentagram, the symbol of Lucifer. So, understand. Alrighty, so chapter 16. I put in part 4 for playing with the big boys from the Prince of Egypt, because the last part that we did went over Samson and the battle. Samson should have ended with chapter 15. There's no reason to add 16, although it does include more prophecies for the last days Messiah, but it's unnecessary because he finished. Samson won. He defeated the Philistines at the day of burning. But he goes on and ruins it with Samson's death in verse 16. But there's other stuff that is vital to the prophecies. Because remember, Samson, the Christ, is not supposed to die. He succeeds in saving the Jews, saving the house of Israel, restoring the kingdom of David, destroying or building, however it's going to be fulfilled, the American government. Oops, I gave you the fulfillment. And just destroying or taking over and restoring Joseph Smith's church organization, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because anciently they had theocracies. They didn't have a constitutional republic, they didn't have communism or fascism, they were theocracies. A combined government and religion, where the king, who was also the high priest, Melchizedek, Pharaoh, was understood as God. We see that in North Korea as Kim Jong-un, his people see him as God on earth. That's where it comes from. This ancient theocracy. And so we've covered Samson's parents, we've covered Samson as a baby, we've covered him as a married, and we've covered him in the battle in which he wins. Now, not the 5? Or this 5. This is 5. So that's the 4. And so this is unnecessary. What should have been done by the author is to put Delilah as the name of the wife who betrays him and who then is murdered by the Philistines. But I went over all that. And so, even though all prophecies prophesy of Christ, who is to come right now, so he is here, you just have to know him, know who to look for, know the prophecies to do that. Because the wise men come to Herod, who's supposed to be dead, and they say, hey, where is this Christ who is going to replace you? And Herod says, excuse me? Astrologers, priests, find out where he is to be born. I want to go worship him. So they come back and say, oh, well, it's a sign in the heaven given by Isaiah. But that's the wrong date. The date's still in the future, but that's what they tell him. He's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. That's not the place. That's not the place of prophecy. That's the date of prophecy. Born of a virgin in the constellation. So they talk about different stories, but it's the same concept. So, for example, Samson talks about the day of burning with 3,000 foxes, not women, though we did have the Me Too movement with 3,000 voices, female voices rising up saying, Me Too. To burn men, rather than burn their bras in the civil rights movement. So, but Malachi tells a different version. The day shall come that shall burn as an oven. So he's using cooking with the baking of bread to describe the latter day burning. And Samson's author uses foxes, where Samson ties firebrands to them and lights them on fire and sets the foxes loose as they go and burn the promised land. Because that's where Samson is, remember? The promised land. But now it's America. So as Babylon destroyed the temple of the wicked Israelites, Jews, so also did the Romans destroy the temple of the wicked Jews. And that, by the way, was what Christ was crucified for, was for treason and terroristic threats. As he was imprisoned. Samson, in this chapter, is now going to be imprisoned, just like Jesus, just like Joseph of Egypt. Remember him? There's going to be a famine. So let's build bishop storehouses across the world so that when the coronavirus of Moses comes, see, they tell different stories, but it's all the same prophecy in the end, and we know by what happens now as fulfillment. Alright, so 16. Samson goes to Gaza and saw there an harlot. So the first wife he had, she's a Philistine. So she's a whore, an harlot. And he even calls her such, as she betrays him to the 30 companions who want to have Samson reveal his secret parable so that they can win the 30 pieces of silver, the garments. And so, she betrays Samson in a heartbeat, and he says, had she not had sex with you, you would have never known the riddle. And he doesn't use those words. He calls her a heifer. And sex with my heifer. So it's a little bit of an insult to both her and to them. And so here he's calling Delilah a harlot, and went in unto her. Now understand, there was a practice, and then this is what happens with anachronisms. In the previous part 4, we found that one of the names of the cities, the author says, and it remains that name to this day. To this day is an indication of when the book was written. That's when the author says, hey, to this day, as I'm writing this book. And so this is not the book of Samson. This is a later author saying, hey, I'm going to explain to you kids, as you all gather around me to tell a bedtime story, about why this place is named such and such. And so he tells about Samson. And so understand that this is not an actual history, because we see anachronisms in his writing. And Delilah is one such anachronism that exposes him as not being accurate with any kind of history regarding Samson. That he's specifically using his day and time to tell of a prophecy of the coming of a Christ. But remember, King David had already come. That's why Samson is called the Sun King. The sign of David is the sun, with the two delta symbols joined together into one to represent the sun. Notice the thorns, or triangles, as Jesus is pictured wearing a crown of thorns rather than a sun disk on his head with the sun rays in place of thorns. Interestingly enough, though, in Egyptian, the thorn is very similar to the pyramid. The pyramid being a symbol of the rising and setting sun. As at noonday, it shines on the pyramid with the limestone that used to cover them, and it would shine very brightly. You couldn't look at the pyramids because the sun is reflecting the light off of it and blinds people. And so the pyramids were a light to all the world. A candle that is placed on top of a hill, you don't cover the light, you let your light so shine. That's where that comes from. And so we're having a repeat here with 16. But in so doing, he's providing us with additional prophecies for the last days Messiah. And so it's in essence a different story, but it's one that could expose this as being much, much later than scholars have thought that the book of Judges and Samuel or Samson had been produced, because of Delilah. And I'll get to that in just a minute. So he has sex with the harlot, and it was told to the Gazites this time, saying, Samson is come hither. So Gazites from Gaza, where there's a harlot. And understand, remember I've been talking about the parents and Jesus with Mary Everybody's associating with the temple for creation. Temples are symbols of creation. Baptism is symbol of birth, and so is done in the temples, because temples are symbols of creation. The rising sun is the birth of a child. Not only is it a prophecy of what time during the day he is to be born, it is also a symbolism. And so understand that the Greeks were the ones who had the practice of temple prostitution. This was taken from the older concept where the pharaohs, and even the kings of Assyria, Mesopotamia, would have their weddings, and Assyria had a period of time where the kings would go yearly on the new year to the temple in a big parade, so all can see as he heads to the temple with the high priest's daughter to have sex with her, and then she gives birth to the heir to the throne of Mesopotamia. The pharaohs had the temple concept of crowning the new king as Christ with anointed Christ, and then also get sealed to his sister to ensure the blood lineage of the dynasty, and there have sex in the temple. So Eli, who took in Samuel as a baby, had two sons himself who were having sex in the wrong room of the temple. And God got mad at Eli and said, "Hey, put your boys in line, because they're having sex with women in the wrong room of the temple." And the boys refused to listen, they died, and so on and so forth. And so understand the history concept here, that again, we're not talking just some floozy of a woman who just doesn't care about her life and is hooking for money. She's a temple prostitute, as would be the case. And it comes from the concept of the symbolism for the last days, that from the apostate church, they will have the false temples without authority, but the Christ who is to be born is to come from parents who have been sealed in this false temple to be raised up to restore the true church, establish the true temple, and save the Jews, save the Israelites, according to prophecy. Joseph Smith, again, I remind you, said this very same thing. Section 103, verse 16. In 15 he says, the redemption of Zion. That's the restoration of the kingdom of David, in establishing New Jerusalem, the promised land, in Zion. And then he says, a man shall be raised up among my people. This is Joseph Smith writing this. My people refers to Mormons. A man shall be raised up among Mormons to restore the kingdom of David. Not the president of the church. Why? Because it's an apostasy. It doesn't need to be restored if it's not an apostasy. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints must be in apostasy, and sure enough, Joseph was murdered, and his attempt to restore the kingdom of David was halted as his organization was usurped and completely altered, and thus needs to be restored. And so, yes, this is a big shock to you. You've never heard or understood this before. But that's the prophecy. You can't argue with God. But Mormons do, nonetheless. And so, let's see. And encompassed him and laid wait. See, laid wait. That's one of the sins of evil people, is they lay in wait to deceive and destroy. They wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. In the morning, the rising of the sun, the birth of the sun. Moses, as a baby. What does Pharaoh want to do to babies? Murder them. Herod, when he hears about a baby being born who will usurp his kingdom, what does he want to do? Kill the babies. Again, we have the same story told in a different way about mourning and killing the Sun King. Samson lay till midnight and arose at midnight. Remember the parable of the 10 virgins. When does the bridegroom come to the wedding? Midnight, just around midnight. Exactly. So here we have a retelling of that prophecy. Took the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts. Now the doors in Egyptian are understood in Hebrew as the 2 delta or daleth in Hebrew in the Aramaic form. You will need to go to Psalm 119 in your printed scriptures. Psalm 119, and it's Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, number 4. And so this is why the author is revealing an anachronism here, because it's post-captivity Jewish period when this is being written about Samuel or Samson. Because it was when Babylon and Assyria even started influencing northern Israel with Assyrian and Semiticism and all the cultural etiquettes of Semitic way of life. But with Babylon, it confirmed it, established that Jews and all of Israel were now Semiticized. And so we can see that by the author calling Samson the Sun King, as I've already explained his name, taking the doors of the gate of the city. Again, referring to this, but referring to the altered shape of the letters of the Hebrew. Well, it became Aramaic, but it just depends on which time period you're referring to and which script you're using. But the Aramaic script that is understood in Semitic Hebrew as referring to doors. So understand that. This is an anachronism that's being given to us here. Letting us know that it's post-captivity Jerusalem. And the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of an hill. Again, what are these? Pyramids, hills, mountains, top of the mountains, top of the hills. top of the pyramids. And on our dollar bill, the top of the pyramid is the capstone, which represents the Messiah, the Christ, the author and finisher of the faith. The stone that the builders rejected, the cornerstone that was rejected, became the capstone of the pyramid. Okay, and so Hebron. And again, let me check. Oh, it's finished. The Mormon wasn't working on this one. Alright, so publish that. Alrighty. Now let's go to Blue Letter Bible. Judges 16. It's going to be awesome if that's the case here. Okay, verse 3. Go to Westminster Leningrad Codex. Nope. It is not the same as Heber or Hebrew. It's the altar as the determinative. But wouldn't that have been cool? Alright, so let's exit out of this. Wow, 4 have already jumped on part 3. Alright. Okay, I can expand the camera again. Okay, so again, notice Hebron has 4 letters. Remember, you have to devowel the words. And so the N is representing kingdom. Kingdom of Heber. And I can't do the guttural as I need to for the H, which is not the same as Heber or Hebrew. And so that's the kingdom of Heber. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. Okay, so now they're saying it's another woman. So the harlot is not the same. So they were just unhappy that he was having sex. They just sprayed for bugs. And so, yeah, the repeat here is interesting, because the first one in the up to 15 is about a woman who cheats on him with these 30 guys and betrays him. And so here they're saying, okay, now he's having sex with a harlot, but now we're taking you to another woman. And so this is an interesting thing. It's like they're putting little clips rather than a harmonized story, though they're trying to claim it's still a continuation of the previous story, which already finished and was perfect for the prophecy, since he did save the house of Israel from the Philistines. But they keep on going, and so 1 to 3 is a story in and of itself, a parable in and of itself, a prophecy in and of itself. And so now in 4, we're doing another prophecy using Samson as the character, and the person's author is tying all of these together into one narrative as if it's all an actual history, and it's not. And so, and it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And here we go, as we're reaching 30 minutes, halfway mark. If I find that at 1 hour I'm almost done. I'm just going to continue on until we're done. So understand this. But Delilah is going to cover a lot of information for you, so hang on. Delilah. While I was imprisoned, in Utah's version of prison for those who don't go to trial, there was a overseer, if you're familiar with Joseph, when he was imprisoned, a guard, whose name was Dacia, and she didn't know the meaning of her name. Her parents just liked the name, it sounded good, so they named her Dacia. Well, as I know Paleo-Greek, I recognized the meaning, and it was Harry. And so you'd think a woman would not want to be called Harry, as women nowadays shave so that they aren't considered harlots. Whereas before, if you shaved, you were considered a harlot, but in our current culture, you have to shave in order to not be considered a harlot. Though harlots nowadays are also shaved and hairy, and it's all mixed up. So outward appearance no longer applies to the scarlet letter of women. And so I never got to tell her what the meaning was, but I went, wait a minute, Esau means hairy. That's why Jacob is told by Rebekah, put on this animal skin that's hairy and go to your father Isaac, who's blind. Here we have crossover of stories, because guess what happens to Samson? And so Jacob, the usurper, usurps the birthright and the blessing of Esau, who is hairy. And that's what Greek, I've noticed, tends to do, as Delilah is doing the exact same thing to Esau with Dacia as Lila to Delilah. Now, where does Lila come from? From chapter 1 of Genesis. And he called the night, he called the darkness night. Night is Lila. And why would it be called night? Well, this is where I'm kind of wondering of the authorship, because there emerged confusion with Genesis talking about the creation of man and woman. In my image have I created man and woman, in the image of God. But then in chapter 2, Adam and a woman are created again, as Jews suppose, because the Bible in the Hebrew text is not translated correctly either. And so, okay. And so there's been a question on Jewish minds that they're waiting for Elijah to come back on Passover so that they can explain, as he sits at their table for dinner for the feast of Passover, wedding feast. See, all prophecies talking about the same event. To ask him, well, why are there two creation stories in our Torah? Well, there was somebody who thought he knew, and it was published in the book Alphabet Ben Sira. And in that book, it's Jewish mystical literature. That's the start of Jewish mysticism. And it was published in 800 AD. So if this seems to be written with that in mind, though it's in the Greek format. We may have, well, the Talmud does talk about Lilith, but not about it as Alphabet Ben Sira talks about Lilith. The Talmud just talks about it as a demon creature, and that's pretty much the end of it. It's kind of vague and kind of bizarre. And there's other passages that also are vague as to this. Isaiah has one that's translated as a particular animal, creature. And so it's not fully understood until Alphabet Ben Sira came out and set everybody straight. And that's now the myth of Lilith. So Lilith is the first wife of Adam in chapter 1. And they were born at the same time, created at the same time. And so they're both immortal, and they're obviously commanded, as Genesis says they were commanded, to have sex. And so they're having sex, and Lilith gets bored and says, I want to be on top now. I don't want to be in the missionary position all the time. I want to be on top. And so Adam says, no, I am your master. You will obey me. You will lie down on your back, and we will commence. And she says, I'm out. See ya. And so she goes eastward into Eden, where Cain goes eastward, and Adam and Eve go eastward when they're cast from the garden. So she goes eastward into Eden. But she has not partaken of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, of which Adam and Eve did, and thus became mortal. And so as a result, God gave Eve to Adam in the second chapter, and Eve remained immortal. And now she wanders the earth as this immortal spirit, as the children of Adam and Eve fill the earth. And so she's furious with this. And so then there's another Jewish tradition that involves a medallion in which they have Elijah from the Bible fame is walking on a road one day and comes across Lilith. And Elijah is more powerful than Lilith, and he's able to be like Wonder Woman and get her to confess to the truth about what she's up to with her Amazon lasso, the lasso of truth. But he doesn't tie her up. No BDSM going on. And Elijah gets her to confess that she's on her way to go kill a newborn baby boy. This Jewish traditional story that was never encapsulated in writing, just an oral tradition passed on from generation to generation, is preserving another prophecy of who they are waiting for to save them, as well as the house of Israel, and restore the kingdom of David. Because Elijah, Passover, to come in the latter days, so they're all symbols in this prophecy collection, each telling it in a different way, in a different manner. And so for Elijah, he makes an agreement with Lilith that if a Jewish household has this amulet hung up on their wall, she cannot enter in through the window and kill the baby. SID syndrome. And she agreed, As long as a Jewish household had this talisman hung up, she can't kill the baby. Similar to Passover, isn't it? Lamb's blood on the doorposts, which reveals that the Torah is not written pre-captivity, is it? All the symbolism. And so that's the story of Delilah, or Lilith, sorry. And so that's where I'm kind of wondering if this segment from the passage of Judges about Samson was inserted after 800. Because in 800, the Masorite Jews assembled together to work on a compiled written text now called the Tanakh, with the Torah, the writings, and the prophets. It's an acronym, not an anachronism, and so I'm kind of wondering, was this put in by those Masoretes when they worked on the compilation of what we currently have today, the Hebrew Bible? Because Delilah seems to indicate that. But Delilah has the Greek form of the determinative, which is often used for the names of women, as I only have the two examples so far. But I am kind of curious. So understand that anachronisms help us identify dating of a particular text, even though they try to claim an older source text for their writing. And it's just because they throw in stuff from their time period that exposes authorship. And so, let's see. I loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah, and the lords of the Philistines came up unto her. Oh, by the way, the story of Alphabet Ben Sira of the woman being on top, guess where that comes from? Not just Genesis chapter 1, but the reason why Genesis chapter 1 is what Alphabet Ben Sira used for that is because of the Egyptian Heliopolis, Sun City, creation story, where the woman, Nut, is on top of Geb, the earth or soil, man. Adam is soil in Hebrew. And so Genesis chapter 2 verse 4. Now this is the generations, the offspring of the heavens and the earth. How are heavens and earth having sex and having offspring? They're not, because the author is referring to Nut and Geb of the Egyptian creation story. Thus where Delilah comes from. Because this is also an example of post-captivity Babylon. Because Babylon said, "We are now your masters. You will embrace us and everything Babylonian." Despite the story of Daniel, who tried to tell the Jews, we must maintain our Jewishness. We cannot fall prey to the culture and customs and language of Babylon, and Jews have failed miserably on that. But again, Daniel could even be a later with its anachronisms. Okay. And Okay, the lords of the Philistines came unto her and said unto her, just like in the previous verses with the previous story of Samson, hey, entice him and see wherein his great strength lies. So now it's not the parable that he gave as a riddle and a competition to have solved before the end of Passover, the wedding feast. Now it's how do we take him down because he's strong. He killed a lot of people. And so they want to know, how do we stop him? What's the secret to his strength? And it's no longer his name, title, and who he is as the Sun King. Now it's his strength, which is power by knowing his name as Ammon, as I told you before. And by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, that we may torture him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. So now it's not 30 pieces of silver, it's 1,100 pieces of silver. And it's not 30 garments from the previous story of Samson. And so now silver is brought into play. And 6, and Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lies. Oh, you're so strong. How are you so strong, big boy? And wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. Seriously, Delilah? How are you so strong? How do we take away your strength so that we can torture you in prison? And Samson said unto her, if they bind me, even with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak. Is that a misspelling? Because I don't think it would be widths, unless widths are 7a. They did put a footnote there. New cords, fresh or moist sinews from animals. Notice when I went over Moses and other videos, I informed you that it comes from the Egyptian 3 animal skins tied together. So they're identifying Samson as this Egyptian symbol for the Moses, as the spelling of Moses also includes the folded cloth, which refers to a child being born, who is Horus of the Egyptians, who is to restore the kingdom of David, the Messiah. As M in Paleo Hebrew corresponds with the priest character of the Egyptians. The water at the top of it, and the J for man. So a priest. Then shall I be weak. So he's lying to her. And shall be as all regular men. So remember Joseph Smith in section 85, verse 7. I shall raise up one mighty and strong. Whereas in 103, verse 16, I will raise up one like Moses. Joseph knew, and he was trying to tell Mormons, because one of his people, Mormon people, a Mormon shall come forth like Moses, like Samson. So 85 is Samson, 103 is Moses. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Dumb Dum 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 dum. Obviously that's not going to work, dear. He's not going to be that easy. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. Again, the chamber. Queens have chambers. Regular households don't have chambers. And if they were tent people, they would have separate tents. So chamber? Again, Sun King. They're talking about the wicked queen. And she said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee. Notice also that Esau, after his birthright and blessing are stolen from him, then goes on to marry a heathen woman. Is it Philistine still? But her name, Judith. Judah in the feminine form. So Esau has his birthright and blessing usurped, and he marries Judith. Samson gets involved with Delilah, who betrays him. See the pattern. Even Joseph, who's locked up in prison, has that incident with the wife of the guard of the jail. He raped me! Yep. So that's again the common pattern theme for whatever is to be the fulfillment. And so obviously he broke the bands. Let's see, wait a minute. No, she said, he break the withs as the thread of tow is broken when it touches the fire. So his strength was not known. And Delilah said unto Samson, behold, thou hast mocked me. You mock my pain. Never do it again. I died that day, and you can die too for all I care. As you wish. Princess Bride again. And told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. How can I destroy you? Tell me. Oh, okay. Here's how you destroy me. That's why I had fun with my a woman formerly called my second ex-wife. I referred to her as Delilah because she cut my hair and then divorced me. And like I have told you before in the previous part, my wives get exclusive knowledge. I tell them everything, whereas I withhold certain information from other people, even on these videos even. And so, yeah, she knew it all. I told her so. And she betrayed me and divorced me. And so I call her Delilah as a result of that. And I've told you about how Jesus had Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene was a thorn in the side to Peter. As Mary would say, well, our Lord and Savior Jesus secretly informed me, and not you, Peter. So, yeah, I always get a chuckle with this story. Let's see. Mocked me, tell me lies. And he says, well, if thou weavest 7 locks of my head with the web, that will take away my power. And she fastened it with a pin, and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awakened out of his sleep, and he went away with the pin of the beam, and with the web. And she said unto him, how canst thou say I love thee? You mock me! You don't love me anymore! When my heart is not with me. Oh, memories on the corner of my mind. Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth, so I can destroy you. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words. See, again, the other wife in the other version of the story did the same thing. What is the parable? You don't love me. You mock me. And she kept pressing him over and over again. And on the 7th day, he gave in. Here's the secret. And sure enough, it was exposed, but Samson won. He lost his wife. He lost the father-in-law, Jethro of Moses. But in the end, Samson won. But here he's not going to win. And so because he gives in, and his soul was vexed unto death. You're bringing me to my deathbed. He told her all his heart. Feelings, nothing more than feelings. And said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head. Remember, no razor as a Nazarene. There's a difference. One is John, the other is Samson. Different cultures. But his is no razor is supposed to cut his hair. And that's why the Jews have their curly locks when they're men, with the beards as well. They're not supposed to cut their hair like Samson, the Sun King, as they are the chosen people. For I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like other men. And so there I tease my second ex, of being Delilah, because she cut my hair every month. And when Delilah saw that he hath, and also because we had gotten married at the Salt Lake Temple and had our wedding feast in room number 13, and had our wedding feast in the Lion House next to the Beehive House. And she's clueless. She doesn't understand. And so I can tell her, and she doesn't get it. She sent and called the lords of the Philistines. Come up this once. I figured it out. For he hath shewed me all his heart. I succored him. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and brought money in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees. You mean lap? And she called for a man. Why can't you cut it? And she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And so, now in the Egyptian version of the story, the origin source, it's not the hair being cut that lost Horus his strength in the beginning of the battle. It's his eyes getting plucked out. So here we go. And she said, The Philistine, Samson, and he awoke, and I will go out before times to shake myself and listen to the part of that. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes. Just like the Egyptian story that originated from this. The eyes are symbolisms of multiple things and prophecies as well. The right eye for the Egyptians is government. The left eye is for religion. The 2 eyes together are the eyes of Horus and are the word for seer, which is Peter. The regular word with the regular eyes for Peter is just to see, the vision. The eyes of Horus are the office of seer, as Pharaoh. And so, seer, which is different than the regular eyes. And Peter, thus Jesus, says, Simon Bar-Jonah, you are now called Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And the church, through Joseph Smith, says it's the rock of revelation. You familiar with Joseph Smith and his rocks in a hat? Yes, crystal balls are used by witches. This is where it all ties in and where everybody goes their own way on interpretation. But Joseph also talked about how every one of us, when we go to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, as exalted beings, we get a crystal ball. So understand that, Mormons. Alright, so where are we? And it's just revelation. Joseph didn't even need it once he figured out how to translate, finally, after being taught by Rabbi Sykes for Hebrew, and then got the Egyptian papyra and was able to actually work with something, having been taught by his York Rites Freemasonry that his father was a master mason in. Okay, and so they then put out his eyes and brought him to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. So he was put into prison. He was wrongfully accused, put into prison, and tortured. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together. I know the picture I'm going to put in there for you. For to offer a great... Okay, now pay attention here, because Bruce R. McConkie put in the chapter heading, he destroys building. Gross. Okay. So they put out his eyes, brought him to Gaza, bound him with fetters of brass, put him in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow. Then the lords of the Philistines, we're over an hour, so I'm going to go right to the end because we're almost done here. The Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice. The lords of the Philistines gather together for a sacrifice, a great sacrifice unto Dagon, their god. Where are sacrifices made? In the prison house, Bruce? In some random building, Bruce? At the temple. Remember in the beginning I talked about temples for births. Now we're having a temple at deaths and at destructions. Babylon destroyed the temple of Jerusalem, the temple of Solomon. The Freemasons used that story to talk about the death of Hiram Abiff at the Temple of Solomon during the time of Solomon, king of of Israel. And so the Masons understood, especially the Knights Templar of the York Rites, about restoring the kingdom of David. It's the Scottish Rites that were infiltrated by the Illuminati with the inverted pentagram symbol of Lucifer, as Albert Pike confirmed it. And so the York Rites, led by Joseph Smith Sr. in 1826, saved America. We're not going to go over that. But that's why the Book of Mormon was written, to further warn Americans of a future attempt to destroy America and to look to the true Messiah, as Joseph says, from the Mormon Church in apostasy in that future time, which is now. And so the temple of Herod, or Solomon, during Herod, or well, it was long after Herod, it was 72 AD, long after the Christ of the Gospels was dead. That temple also got destroyed by the Romans. But this one is the wicked religion's temple. It is not the good guy's temple. This is the Lucifer temple, with the symbol of Lucifer as the inverted pentagram. Catching on. And so this is how God does things. As Samson said, I'm just repaying them for what they did to me. Babylon destroyed God's temple. Romans destroyed God's temple. Now it's time for God to destroy Lucifer's temple in the latter days. And so, yes, when I win, as I've already won, but when the judge gives the order, and I'm hoping it's going to be on Friday, because that would be cool symbolism, as it's Shavuot, the Pentecost of the Jews, the giving of the Torah, the law to save Israel, to restore the Constitution, as Joseph said. I will be destroying any and all structures, buildings, Bruce, that contain the inverted pentagram on them. And to rejoice. And they said, our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And remember the two Jews, not prophets of the Mormon Church, two Jews. They were raised up to the Jews, who die in Jerusalem, and they held a great party. That's where that came from. And so, yes, John the Revelator got that one a little wrong. This is more closer. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. Remember the idol of the beast, though, that John talks about? You must worship the beast. Worship the idol, the image of the beast. And again, Moses, he goes up to the mountain to get the Torah for Pentecost, and Aaron created an idol god for them to worship, which turned out to be the 15th of May when that sign in the heavens occurred. Because all these prophecies come from the signs in the heavens. That's why they're able to tell us the days of the fulfillment of these prophecies. And so Pentecost is Friday. So we have to see. Let's see. They may marry, call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house. So where is he going? To the temple. And they made sport, and they set him between the pillars. The pillars of what building, Bruce? Where they sacrifice to God, their God, at the temple. The pillars of the temple. Here's an anachronism, though. The Greeks designed their temples with pillars. So did the Egyptians. But this is post-captivity, as we've already established. So Greeks were in Israel with their temples and structures there. So, both apply. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, the child, suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. So again, he's the man-child that John the Revelator talks of in Revelation chapter 12. And he's blinded, just as Horus is blinded at the beginning of the battle, which refers to seership. He's not the seer, but the office of seer needs to be restored back to the kingdom of David. And so technically it's not Horus who loses his sight. He's the one who restores sight. Just as Jesus restored sight to the blind, healing them. Just as the true Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints would be healing people of coronavirus, not saying, let's have a fast where you pay us fast offerings and that'll cure coronavirus magically. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines. What house? The house of Dagon. What is the house of Dagon? It's the temple. There were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women. So this is a Greek temple, because it's after that pattern. Because the Egyptian temples with the pillars, they had the sloping roofs for the most part, I think. Depends on where you were. If you were on the straight and narrow path leading to the pyramid temple, but the pyramid itself was the temple. So the Greeks are different in that respect. And Samson called unto the Lord, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Again, that's where it comes from, the same pattern. I pray thee, strengthen me. I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. At once avenged. This once? Didn't he have another story where he was avenged? Now, for my 2 eyes? Not about your wife who was murdered by the Philistines? See? This is a completely different story inserted in after the fact. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars, upon which the temple stood, not building, not house, and upon which it was borne up, and the one with his right hand, and the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. No, you're not supposed to die. That was your father. You're restoring the kingdom of David. You're supposed to live to save the Jews and the Israelites. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. He's calling him a sinner. he failed to fulfill his prophecy, and so in his death he then fulfilled the prophecy. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zoreth and Eshtaol in the burying place of Manoah his father. His father came down, but they buried him in the burying place where his father is already buried. See, they messed up the story here. His father had died because he needs to restore the kingdom of his father. They didn't tell the story that way, did they? But he judged Israel 20 years. Wait a minute. He had already judged Israel 20 years at the end of verse 15, at the finishing of this story, which he succeeded in conquering the Philistines and restoring the kingdom of David. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Now they're saying it again? 20 years? So this was all done in the 20th year? Are you kidding me? No. See, this is how you correct the Bible. Alrighty. And so then Micah is the next story. So there you go. There's the prophecy of Christ for Mormons from the story of Samson. And it's not an actual history. They screwed it up royally there in that final one. But now you understand who you're supposed to be looking for better now than before. Because yes, there's going to be Mormons now that are saying, hey, I was sealed in the Salt Lake Temple. I'm not sure if it was room 13 though, and some of you may have had room 13. You're now going to be thinking, is it I? Am I the one to restore the kingdom of David? Let me give you a final warning. The answer is no. Because you have not fulfilled all the prophecies. Let me remind you with a summation of Matthew. Matthew constantly was writing about a prophecy and then said, thus saith the prophet, according to the words of the prophet. He was trying to assemble a narrative according to what was prophesied about it. But again, he blew it at the end by having Jesus die. Horus doesn't die. Osiris died. That's why there's the need for Horus to battle the usurped king of both government and religion and restore the kingdom of his father, the kingdom of David. Jesus failed, so the Jews aren't looking for Jesus because the Romans kicked their butt. They're looking for another future time. The Jews, when the Holocaust ended, they had succeeded in taking over Jerusalem with the 7-day war. They all understood this could be it. But after all this time, still has not come. They're still waiting for their Christ who was prophesied. You need to know all the prophecies, just like Herod said, where is he going to be born? You need to know that. You may have gotten sealed in the Salt Lake Temple. You may have been sealed in room 13. You may have had your wedding feast in the Lion House, next to the Beehive House. But there are other prophecies that you have to have a checklist for. And you have to check every single one in order to be qualified. Now you're probably saying, well, how do we get appointed by God, or do we need to be? if we fulfill all the prophecies, is that it? Well, part of the prophecy is also God appoints you. Remember Moses? Jethro goes to the top of the mountain, burning bush. You will go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. Now, that was when God chose Moses. And we know from Numbers what that is referring to. In Numbers chapter 12, Aaron and Miriam, the siblings of Moses, are upset with Moses. They don't like the way he's running things in the new land, the promised land. They're not happy with his law of consecration and the way he's running the government and the religion. And so they say, hey, we're siblings, why not us rule and have a voice in how things are supposed to be done? There will be Mormons when it's finally understood who this guy is and he succeeds in restoring the kingdom of David, that there will be Mormons saying, hey, I am having equal access to revelation. I got an idea too. Remember Lucifer and the plan of happiness and the council in heaven. I have a plan too that's better than yours, Heavenly Father. I will save everybody. We just need to take away their agency. So be very, very careful about who you think you might be if you think you've fulfilled the whole checklist, because here, right here, is the big checklist. And so the Lord comes down in a pillar of light, cloud here in this instance, at the door of the tabernacle. And again, the tabernacle is the temple. And the door shows the anachronism in this. And he says to them, hear now my words. If there be a prophet, remember Samuel, the author of that says before time, a prophet was called a seer. This was before Samuel, supposedly, maybe, maybe not, because Samuel established the kingdom of David. And so it was before. And so this should be seer, but anyway. I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him. Here's what the real burning bush was. A vision. The first vision of Joseph Smith, remember that? He wrote it in 1838. I'd already done the video where I said that wasn't an accurate history. Joseph was writing a prophecy for the future Joseph Smith who would restore the kingdom of David. The future man like Moses, the future man like Samson. That's why we have the first vision. Had nothing to do with anything of Joseph's life, but Joseph wrote it as if it were him in the context of the early 1800s, spring of 1820. There was no religious gathering. There was Freemasonry being built all over the place in western New York. That religious revival came after 1820. And so Joseph tried to remember the context and he didn't get it accurate, but that's why he was trying to tell the parable. And so he tells his mom, I have learned for myself that Presbyterianism is not true. Well, they didn't know about Presbyterianism until 1823, when they had a Presbyterian pastor do the funeral services for Alvin, in which he says, Alvin's going to burn in hell because you didn't have him baptized, as we Presbyterians say he needs to have been. And then the Methodist Church, Joseph didn't go to that church until 1828, after his firstborn son died. Emma Hale and her parents were Methodists. Joseph attended the Methodists of Emma Hale and her parents' Methodist Church in Harmony, Pennsylvania, not Susquehanna River, as I've corrected that for you. And so, yes, because Joseph Smith was a glass looker and was arrested, the Methodists not only kicked him out, but therefore his wife Emma, and therefore her parents, out of Harmony, where they then moved to Susquehanna River. And so the Lord will make known of himself to the chosen one, the real chosen one, not Trump, not Nelson, not Brigham Young, in a vision. And I will speak unto him in a dream. Dream and vision are one and the same. Joseph had dreams. My family, I saw you guys bowing to me. Oh yeah? Well, we're going to sell you into prison. Betray you. So yes, that's the prophecies. This Christ will be betrayed. He will be imprisoned. You need to have that on your checklist for prophecies. So I'm now starting to cry, so I'm going to end. Know God. Know the true God. Don't just listen to other people tell you who to believe in. You've got to search the scriptures, because everybody prophesied of them.